What's up, guys? This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. And today, as you probably can see, if you're looking at your screen, I've loaded up two Zoom tables. One of them, both at $1, $2, the one on the left being a PLO table, the one on the right being a no limit table. In watching some of our other pros videos, I found that Zoom is excellent for making live videos due to the fact that you can control the speed of the action and obviously, be involved in enough hands that it doesn't get slow at any point. I decided to make a half and half video mostly because, it started because I wanted to kind of please everybody, and I've been getting requests, obviously from both sides of the fence, on what my next essential video should be. And yeah, I opted to do one of each. Also, I think what I really like about doing one of each is that I think there are a lot of players who are still strictly no-limit players who maybe have dabbled a little bit in PLO but aren't very confident and haven't kind of taken the leap to learn. And for them, I think this will be a nice little push in that direction, because I really do feel that, if you're going to have some longevity in your poker career, you should be expanding to other games. And though I'm not entirely in touch with the no-limit games these days, my understanding is that there's more action at PLO across at least most stakes. So without further ado, we'll get into the action. I have played much more 6-max PLO in the last 5 years than 6-max no limit. As you guys have probably seen, I'm taking kind of what I would say is a common approach, and I'm actually going to check this back. It's a very connected board, and obviously I don't know much about his range, but people's small blind cold calling ranges are pretty strong in general. So I feel good about checking that back and trying to realize my equity. Now that I turn the open ender, I think I have to call. And we have the benefit of being able to bluff some rivers if necessary. And we have the benefit of being able to hit two pair and potentially find a hero call, I think. Yeah, I don't see against an unknown. I have a color on him, but I have no idea where I've seen him from. Maybe a previous video. But actually, my colors mean different things for different people, actually. I'm going to call. I think it's a very easy call. There's so many draws that missed. There's so few hands that beat me, actually. Sets, King 10, and I block the straight. So that was just an odd play. This may be a little bit loose. It would depend on his opening range in the cutoff, and I'm not... obviously I don't have a HUD up. I actually don't have my my HUD working for Zoom. I think there's an update that I need, and I just haven't bothered to get it because I don't play Zoom. And but I just don't think it matters, since I'm just not going to have enough hands in this session to get any kind of significant data anyways. But I think ace-5 suited is a pretty reasonable call. You could opt to 3-bet it against some players, but I'll take, a pretty playable hand in my position all day. That's fine with me. This is a pretty terrible board. I'm actually just going to give up. His range to not 3-bet includes a lot of weak kings, like a king 10-4 single suited, because he doesn't want to risk getting 4-bet by somebody he assumes is an aggressive regular. So yeah, I think giving up on these boards is fine. He has sets fairly often. I block some of the 9-8, 6-5 type hands he can have with my 9-8-7, and so I think it's just very likely he has high cards. So if he doesn't happen to have a set, he still very often has pair plus straight draw of some kind, whether it be a gutter or an open ender, potentially a wrap, and in addition he'll have some 2-pair combos. So I just think his fold to c-bet there is so low, and we don't have many turns we can barrel, so I think pretty easy check fold. I don't know how to. Yeah. If you are c-betting, near 100%, I think it's a mistake. Just because, especially if you're transitioning from no limit, this might look like a really good board to c-bet as the preflop raiser, because it's high card board. But it connects so well with the cold calling range there, especially when you take into account that kings and queens are hands that they're not going to want to 3-bet, and actually end up being a significant portion of players' cold calling ranges. A lot of people in PLO will c-bet, like check back in position very often, because they get to see a free turn, but they just c-bet everything out of position because they don't get to see a free turn if they check, and they don't want to be blown off, between 10 and 40% equity. Even with a hand like this, if he only has one pair, I have some decent equity, and I have some turns and rivers I can barrel. But I think that you definitely need to pick your battles a little bit, and you can't just be c-betting all the time, especially on boards that, they're going to continue on a lot. I am going to go ahead and c-bet this. There's not really much of a purpose to it in that I don't think he's going to call many worse hands, perhaps worse queens. And then maybe like an ace-jack, ace-10 type hand. I do open myself up to getting check-raised, which just happened and is pretty ugly. I'm going to c-bet over here. I have the king of diamonds blocker, which means there are just very few hands he can check-raise. I also block the ace. And, taking down the pot with the best hand is not a bad result. He's repping essentially. I was actually tempted to 3-bet with a queen blocker, but I think it's kind of silly, because I'm basically just trying to make him fold his draws that have okay equity when I can call in position and potentially, call down if the board bricks off. He's repping king queen. I don't know if this is the type of player that will. I mean, obviously 7-7 king queen, and then kings and queens, which a lot of players I would expect would 3-bet even against an under the gun open, but I obviously don't know that. A limping player, I assume, is going to be weak, so I'm going to isolate with, even though we were already playing a pot heads up, I'm going to build the pot against a weaker player. I'm going to fold here because the board's gotten too connected, and it's going to get very tough to play on rivers. I think that, obviously, I'm behind all of his flop value range, and if he does have, like, an ace-10 of clubs, I'm slightly ahead. If he does have jack-10, he got there. It's maybe a little bit weak on the turn to fold there, but I think it's good. Here I'm going to barrel off. I have the queen blocker, and I just think it's very likely that he calls flop with one pair and folds, and also that he calls turn with two pair and then folds river. This is just a little bit too weak to isolate. I am going to assume, readless, that people limping are generally weaker players, especially, since we're down at 1-2. I probably should start taking, or not even taking notes, but just marking players when they limp, just so when I see them again, I remember that it was them that limped. I recognize Drayton as a reg. I think he used to play higher, or maybe I've played with him in videos a lot. But I'm going to call with a hand that, is pretty weak, but the boards that I connect with, first of all, are not boards that I'm going to be dominated on, and second of all, are boards that he's going to expect me to attack a lot, much more than I have hands, so I actually think I can get decent value on those boards. Very odd that he's checking this flop. I just can't see many hands in a reasonable 3-betting range from the small blind that are check folding on a board with, basically it's impossible for him to have a hand that's not aces that doesn't contain a straight draw. So if he just, any queen jack, any like 7-8 is going to come with a 10 or a 6 or both. Queen jack 9, it's just so easy for him to have hands on this board, one way or another. I actually am tempted to think I have to fold. He could have a, alright, I'll get to that in a second. Fold here. I am going to 3-bet here. Just because I think that it plays better than calling. He presumably has a wide opening range, and I'll take the pot down a lot pre-flop as well as post-flop. I think calling, presumably his range is so wide that it's just better to try to take it down pre-flop, I guess. And in a sense, push some equity and playability with ace-3 suited. We have a limper. a good player that's isolating a shorter stack that cold calls. This is normally not a hand that I want to pump pots with multi-way. However, given the situation, I expect that this player has a weak range, I expect this player has a weak range, and I expect he has a weaker range than normal to isolate. So I just think I have enough equity. This also, especially without the ace-high suit, is not a hand that plays very well in a multi-way pot. You flop top 2, which when you do get it in, you're behind or you're, flipping. You don't very often, obviously, you don't flop sets, you don't flop nut draws. I mean, second nut draws is decent. In this situation, I'm going to bet half of this player's stack, which means that I can reopen the action if it comes down to that. I'm actually going to check back here and talk about it in a second. I think betting is certainly fine, but I don't feel comfortable betting 3 streets for value with Jack 10 here. Against what I assume is a pretty strong range that called out of position to my 3-bet. So I'm going to go ahead and rep ace king ace queen and get him potentially to start bluffing or to call down lighter. This is actually interesting if he checks, because assuming he kind of knows what he's doing, he should expect me to have ace king and ace queen a lot and expect me to bluff this river. Or value bet it, which means if he has a 7, I would always be checking to check raise. I think that if I had ace 10, I would probably value bet, expecting to get called by worse 10s and potentially some hero calls, but with Jack 10, there are just very few hands that I beat that are going to call me. Obviously, King 4 suited was not going to call me. I guess I talked enough about this hand, it's not that interesting. The action's going a little faster than I expected. I guess that's why I call it Zoom. Queens against an under-the-gun opener. I'm doing a lot of country checks. Germans are generally tight. I usually would call here. Against an under-the-gun open, I'm not... I wouldn't fault anybody for raising. You obviously... Well, not obviously. Many would argue you need a raising range in this spot. But it's not necessarily obvious if you want to defend your big blind a lot and kind of protect that range by calling your stronger hands as well. But queens is a tough hand to play against a strong range, out of position when 3-betting, because they 4-bet all the better hands for value and you get in trouble, and occasionally 4-bet bluff, and then even when they call, an overcard's gonna flop often enough that it's a bad situation. I kind of hate I don't hate the spot. I have the second nuts. It's really hard for me to get value because it's really hard for me to be bluffing here. However, it's also just basically impossible for him to rebluff me. So I'm just very confident bet folding. I don't think he's ever going to bet this hand for me. So I just don't see a better way to get value. Potentially, no, I don't see him betting worse flush even. Isolate. Another country read. Israelis generally aren't as tough. He also has a shorter stack, which kind of reinforces that. But King Jack off it's a hand you can't call, and has some good blockers. So I like to 3-bet it. Obviously, this guy knows I'm making a video. I don't have time to type to you, dude. I'm going to c-bet here. Bottom 2 pair is not a hand that I'm excited to get money in with. I'm not going to go broke with this hand. When he leads into me, I'm just going to fold. I just have no hand, and though I could raise, I certainly can't float profitably, in my opinion. I'll have some better hands to do that with, especially in a 3-bet range. In my 3-bet range, I'm going to have a lot of like suited middling cards that are going to connect very well with that, or overpairs, and all of those can continue. This is weird. I get check raised. I'm actually just going to fold. Like I said, it's against any legitimate range, it's not going to do well at all. Bottom 2 pair, if you are a no limit player who's going to dabble in PLO, is bottom 2 pair is one of the most classically overplayed hands by no limit players. Pretty terrible hand, because any legitimate hand that's getting it in with you, you have, near zero equity against, which is really hard to do in PLO. Let's get this out of here. Okay. Yeah, it's just really hard to have no equity in PLO when you get it in, and this is a situation where that's going to happen. This is a hand I sometimes 3-bet, but I'm comfortable just calling. I think you could really go either way. I am in a check raise here. This is a board that I would attack a lot, and though I do have for the no limit guys, a hand that you consider a semi-bluff, I consider this a value check raise. I want to attack this board a lot, and very often I'm going to have hands that I can't fight back with once I do raise. And this is a hand that I can, very happily stick all the money in with. I'm flipping against the nuts and against the set. Probably doing a little bit better against the nuts than a set. And obviously, turns and rivers play well for me too. It's just very hard for me to not do well check raising that hand. Yeah, I don't need to keep showing this hand history, but if he's raised folding, then obviously I want to continue with my hand, but if he's not raised folding, he has... I'll lay this down. If he's not raised folding, he has Queen 7, he has a set. If he does somehow have like 5, 6, 7, 8, he's actually a slight favorite, I believe. And, even like Ace Queen 6, 5, which would be pretty spewy by him, in my opinion. I guess not that spewy, but a little bit spewy. Even that would be flipping with me, or slightly ahead of me. Actually, it'd be ahead. So yeah, there's just, it's very easy bet fold. The reason I bet is because I can't really call any turns, and I do have a hand that I can bet, and then I'm going to check here. Rep a pair. I think he expects me to bet a draw, so what I was planning to do was call turn when he led, and then he would give me credit for betting the river. Now that he's checked twice, I'm going to go ahead and bet. And, if he calls the turn with ace high, that's fine. I have plenty of equity. The reason I bet this hand rather than check back, if I'm not going to be getting it in, then I do have a little showdown value, is that I have to fold so many turns because of how poorly it plays. Any overcard hurts. Standard, I guess. Any overcard, any card other than a 7 or a 4. And I have to probably fold the turn unless I pick up, like a spade draw and a gutter or something like that, or even a spade draw. But what happens is I fold the turn a lot, or I fold the river a lot, or I call and I'm wrong. And by betting, oftentimes what can happen is I can either, on certain turns I can bet, but on a lot of turns I can check back and get to show down my hand against a one-pair hand. And this is also a hand that I'd rather protect if one of them has jacks, king, jack, jack, 3, they actually have pretty good equity against my actual hand. And it's a hand they're obviously folding, so I'm happy to just make them fold that hand, take down the pot. This is interesting spot. We got 2 hands going on. Obviously in a 3-bet aces, I guess it's not obvious. Some people, no, it's obvious. Here, this is not a board that connects well with many legitimate preflop calling hands, so I just went ahead and took a stab at it. I have a terrible hand against a raise, so it's a very easy fold. And you guys are seeing me bet fold a lot in PLO, but to be honest, PLO is a game of of bet folding in a lot of situations, and because very often, at least when you're running bet, it is very often you're going to have enough of a hand to back up your. All right, nah, I think it's a based on country reads. I think this is a regular isolating weaker player. I timed out. I actually wasn't going to follow through with it because I think it's kind of too obvious, and I think he'd expect it, but it's not a bad cold 4-bet spot. Anyways, yeah, you catch so many hands in PLO that can continue profitably that you don't need to go crazy bluffing and rebluffing your weak 1-pair hands, or trying to hero call with your weak 1-pair hands like kings in that spot. You have more than enough to protect your range, your betting range. And people can't go too crazy. There are not a ton of hands that they'll want to value raise in those spots because there are not a lot of hands that they'll want to get all their money in with into a pot so small with 100 big blinds. So you really, frankly, they're not raising as much as you may think, or at least most players aren't. And if a player is raising a crazy amount, especially out of position, you're going to punish them just with I mean, you don't have to even do anything, honestly. I mean, obviously you need to call them down lighter and get it in lighter against somebody when you notice they're going kind of crazy with check raises, but your range is going to do the work for you, assuming you're playing reasonably pre-flop, and yeah, and they're just going too crazy. It's going to punish itself, that adjustment. Here's a spot, again, where the board does not connect well with any legitimate calling ranges. So I'm going to go ahead and bet. You could take this hand and check back. It actually plays okay on turns because any overcard gives you some extra outs. Ace being the worst, it gives you a gutter. Or no, it gives you a double gutter because of the 3. And King or Jack is 2 pair. Queen is an open ender with a pair, so I could continue on a lot of turns. Here he leads. I'm just going to raise because I have such a good price on it, and I find that people lead weak to fold often enough that that's profitable. Obviously, it's an exploitative play. I don't have a particularly great hand to be doing that with. 3s. I think I'm probably going to fold. People do seem to be playing kind of weak, but he's opening from the hijack, and I think that it's a little too loose to be 3-betting there, although it's certainly not that bad. I think I may expect people to expect me to go a little more crazy than I will. This is a hand that I used to open, but in watching some other pros' videos on Run It Once, I've kind of shied away in a non-ante game from playing too loose. People are playing too well nowadays and too aggressively. So this guy's almost definitely regular. If he's opening 100% of buttons, this is a clear call, but if he's opening like 60%, I think that this is a little bit spewy to call. I still don't hate it. I'm going to go ahead and call. It's obviously on the looser side. Going to go ahead and just call with kings. I have the best hand very frequently, but I don't think that I'm going to get much money in good, and I do have a hand that hits the boards that it looks like I hit. I actually think he'd just c-bet most of his air. I mean, I know people are getting better at checking back, but with this no equity hand, I'm just gonna let him have the pot. And I am going to check raise here quickly because I'm running out of time bank. I don't expect a ton of action, but it'd be an absolute disaster not to stack a lower set if the board gets scarier. This is a board that, I need to protect against a little bit. There are a ton of draws he can have that can continue. 6-5 suited, I think, is just strong enough to call. Some people may disagree with me. Queen of Hearts turn is a pretty bad one for me. I'm going to bet, reason being... That's interesting. I'm going to bet, reason being that it's very hard for him to raise. I get to realize my equity with my boat outs. And at the same time, if he does have a wrap, like 4-7-8 or 4-6-7-8, he's just going to fold the turn, and that's a much better result than letting him realize what's actually pretty good equity. Here I'm just going to shove. I think that he has a flush very often, and he's going to call with it often enough, and he's certainly never going to bet with it. I don't think he's floating the flop and then floating the turn, so I don't really see myself inducing a bluff. Perhaps if I check, he value bets his nut flush, but I think he's going to call with that most of the time anyways, so there's really no reason to check in this spot. I think the only non-standard part of this hand, pre-flop is a little bit non-standard, but also on the turn, some people might not expect me to be betting, especially if you're a no-limit player, because, I mean, legitimately, he probably would get it in on the flop with 6s or 5s. He'd probably fold the flop with 6-5. Yikes. All right, let's do some country reads. I think I'm supposed to fold. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just can't see myself doing well against both of their ranges. There's a little bit of dead money in the pot here, but I would have liked to have seen that somehow. Perhaps I can in a second. I'll check that out. Yeah, a lot of no-limit players would think that, especially if you're reading hands well, he basically almost always has a draw. I assume that means he loves me. That's sweet of him. I would have said something back. he should have a draw because I have two of the kings blocked. He should not have 6-5 or 6-6 or 5-5. Usually 6-6 or 5-5. Doesn't play pre-flop, but also we'll put another raise in on the flop and kind of protect their hand. It's interesting. Gonna go ahead and isolate until proven otherwise. Here, let's make him green because he limped. It's actually not even. I don't even know what my green color means, to be quite honest. So yeah, he very often does have a draw, but my turn bet is strictly to fold out his wraps, as I said, and if he does have a flush, he should not raise the turn with any flushes. I'm not sure that he will abide by that strategy, but I think what he should do for his range is float the turn with his continuing range, and including some hands to bluff river with. But and the reason for that is he should let me barrel off either incorrectly for value or as a bluff, and that way he still can have every hand when I check to him on the river. Whereas when he shoves turn, he basically has to have the nuts or a nut blocker, potentially a set. He can't he can't shove a wrap on the turn. So what he should do for his whole range is just call the turn and make a decision on the river, and he's well balanced and well protected. Whether he'll do that or not is another story. I'm actually going to make an odd play and check call here. I think people stab this board too often, and first of all, I don't have a hand that against an opponent I'm readless against. I don't feel comfortable bet calling, although I probably would, but I'm not happy about it. So I'd rather check call and let him bluff some very little equity hands, especially when I have two overs as well. I have the 5 blocker, which is not too exciting. I am going to check call this turn, I think. I mean, I'm not happy about it. Potentially could raise. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. He shouldn't have a set. I think he very often has like kings or queens, which I have okay equity against and can fold. He should not have many 5-3 hands in his range, given that he called pre-flop, and he's from Finland, so he should have at least somewhat decent understanding of PLO. Obviously, it's not a situation where I'm going to have the straight often, and I don't have much of a raising range other than a straight, so if he's paying good attention, I think that he should not be giving up here, but I think it's a spot where he's betting so frequently. Like, I think when he gets there with kings or queens, he's always betting and pretty much always bet folding unless he has diamonds. And if he bets flop with air, he's going to continue betting there a lot too. So, without pulling up that hand history, or I guess I can now because I talked about this. But yeah, the last thing I was saying is since I'm not getting raised, sorry to jump around a little. Since I'm not getting raised, I'm going to call. It's a little bit loose. It's from Bolivia though. Since I'm not getting raised here, I get to realize my equity kind of cheaply by betting around half pot, and it works well for my range as well. This guy. A lot of guys from all over at these lower stakes. I'm actually going to fold. This hand plays terribly in a 3-bet pot, and I'm out of position to the bigger stack. I'm going to 3-bet this. Let's make another country read. That's obviously a little thin. I feel like it's just barely too weak to call, although I don't mind calling. And actually, now that we've talked about this sufficiently, because the last thing about that hand is he's going to bet a flush and charge me anyways most of the time, so I'm not really saving money. Here's a spot where I think what I've done is induced him to bet basically 80%, 90% of his range on the flop, and then like 80% of that range on the turn, and so I've weakened his range so much that when I put in a turn raise, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, there's not a lot he can do about it. I'll talk about it more in a second. I'm just going to call here, although raising to protect my hand is a decent option. I'm going to bet here, and if raised, this is a little bit of a mistake. I didn't see that it was three-way. It's actually not a mistake because I need to protect my hand, and if he's cold calling, I don't expect him to be. I think more often than not, he'll be not that good. All right, so real quick, I'm going to bet here for protection. And this is kind of the same reason that this play worked over here. Sit out for a second while I talk about this. I forgot that I can do that. This play, worked well because I induced him to have full range, or most of his range, betting twice. And even though I don't rep this hand well, there's just not a lot he can do about it. If he does call with kings, I still have some equity, as well as, I can bluff some rivers. The reason it works is because in PLO you are supposed to just bet turns when check to be quite honest, or even out of position, because you just always have decent equity, and they always do too. So if you can make them fold ever, it's really beneficial to you. If he's not slow playing, I'm only beat by a set here, so I'm going to go ahead and value bet, given that the flush draw missed and the queen jack 10 wrap missed. I could also call with like 9 jack 10 with a dangler, like jack 10 9 3 on the flop, and then play it this way on the turn and river. So I think very easy for me to rep a bluff here, and definitely want to go for value with this hand. But you'll see on the turn here, I didn't have the nuts. Not a hand that like I was bet folding it if he raised. However, it's still a value bet, and it's mostly a protection bet. There. And I do actually want to see if I could find, there was a hand, I actually don't even remember now. I'm going to make a loose call here. But we're deep, and I'm in position, and I feel pretty confident that I can take advantage of that. I feel like there was a hand that I wanted to see the results of. You guys remember that? Unfortunately, you can't tell me. Okay, here. So I would have gotten it in bad. It went, here I'm just going to make a pretty exploitative stab. If he doesn't have anything, he's kind of trapped in the middle, and this guy's already said he doesn't have much. So unless he's being smart and tricky and going for a check raise here, I think that as long as this guy doesn't have anything, it gets through the field very often. Very interesting. I actually don't expect... So when this guy doesn't raise with his shorter stack, I take a lot of sixes out of his range. It's possible he's slow playing, but I think it's kind of unlikely. At least unlikely enough that I think he has so many combos of flush draws that he's just going to fold the turn a lot. However, this guy has aces a lot, which kind of scares me. I'm gonna give up, because if he doesn't have aces, he can still have like one of them usually will have an ace with a flush draw. So I think they're just not folding turn, and my equity against that's really poor. Interestingly enough, I river a straight. I now lose to ace-6, ace-ace, 5-5. Basically, I lose to his slow-played hands, either pre-flop or on the flop, and I don't think he's slow-playing often enough for that to be... for me to fold, even though I don't think he's bluffing into two people that often. I think it's just barely a call, and I just have to hope he's being a little crazy. Turns out that he was value betting. So he called with the gutter, which is god awful here. He called pre-flop, which is awful, and he called flop, which is awful. And then he value bet the straight on the river, which actually is a pretty good value bet, given the way the hand played out. Get 3-bet by a good player. This is a hand that doesn't actually do very well against 3-bet. And our stacks are not very good for me to 4-bet. I mean, I can 4-bet fold, I guess. But my equity's not great. This is actually, you can really consider folding here. This flop is interesting in that neither of us hit it too frequently. It's more likely that I have queens than he. I'm pausing this table because just too much is going on, and I actually, I wanted to bring up the ace-king fold. Or we saw the results. It was against ace-king and tens, and I guess I'll start that back up in a second. Running out of time. I just think he's bet folding very, very frequently here. So just because I don't think he's going to bet get it in with just a queen. I'm trying to find my other table real quick. There we go. Obviously, I have to fold. Let's see. So, the last hand I made, a not entirely credible bluff check raise. I guess you guys have seen that I'm doing a lot of I'm taking a lot of non-credible lines with my bluffs, which is something you can do when you're playing smaller stakes. As your opponents get tougher, it's maybe a little loose. As your opponents get tougher, you need to be a lot more worried about what you're repping and your balance. But at lower stakes against weaker opposition, even though that guy was a regular, just speaking in general terms, against weaker opposition. This is very interesting. Anyways, the last thing I'm going to say is, yeah, against weaker opposition, you're going to have to get it in. I think that when he has a flush, he won't pot. At least I'm confident enough that I can get it in, because I'm flipping against his other hands. Okay, I'm wrong. And obviously that's going to happen sometimes, but the times that I'm not wrong, which I think is more often than not, I'm doing well enough there in equity that folding would be a big mistake. Yeah, I guess the last thing that I was saying about this is, even though I recognize him as a regular, in kind of general terms, against weaker opposition, you should worry about what kind of hands they have and how scary the board is for their hand, and not so much about what you're repping. And I know that kind of goes against a lot of, if you've watched my training videos, it goes against a lot of what I preach. However, this is a board that is connected, so I can definitely see him check folding to give up with certain hands. Let's not do that. He did not check fold. I guess with my equity, I have enough fold equity on the turn that I feel this is a profitable semi-bluff, and as far as the river, it's going to be an interesting decision as to whether I can barrel off or not. When he check calls twice, I think he has a lot of ace-ace-10 type hands, or ace-queen-10. But yeah, I think he folds off enough with his one pair check calls, or potentially like his weak pair plus flop flush draw that he just gives up with on the turn. Here I get 3-bet, and I'll have better hands to call with. I think it's fold. Haven't even had a chance to drink some water, guys. That's Zoom for you. I actually wanted to play some Rush on full tilt, and I looked and they didn't have a lot of 1-2 running. I think at PLO they didn't have anything above 10 cent, 25 cent. I keep checking countries. I think I can profitably defend this because I think my skill edge is much greater than his, but I don't think that it's a good defense in general, in terms of a general game plan, so I'm going to fold so that I'm not teaching you guys bad habits, because that is a fold, I think, in practice, in a lot of situations, especially if you're newer to PLO. And this is borderline. Definitely from the cutoff, I would raise this hand, but it does not play well in multi-way pots, which does happen a lot. It does not play well to 3-bets. So really, you're just hoping to get it heads up, which I did, or you're hoping to steal the blinds actually above anything else. Very standard bet here. Check calling is an option, but it actually is it's a little bit too poor of a hand for that, I think. We find ourselves in an interesting situation here where I think we have the best hand on a board that we can't call a raise. So you could consider check calling here, but I think all of his hands will have too much equity for us to do that. I'd rather just bet and protect against ace king XX. I'm gonna donk into this limp pot with my gutter. So here I have the 1-card straight, and there's no value in betting. Certainly not as a value bet, and not as a bluff either. It's one of those hands that all the better hands call and the worse hands fold. So I'm going to check and do my best to make a decision. And luckily he most likely had 2-pair, and we got to show that down. I'm going to barrel on the right because a 10 is an overcard to middle and bottom pair. Obviously my equity is not great, and against top pair my equity is terrible, but I think when he check calls he very often has a 6 or a 3, and so my 7's usually good, my 5's always good, and I think the 10 scares him enough that he's going to fold those hands pretty frequently. I think that's something that is important to recognize in No Limit when a non-overcard is actually an overcard to most of the pairs in their range. The 10 is not a card he hits almost ever, unless he has like 6-10 suited. Potentially ace-10 that he played, but he wouldn't have played ace-10 that way. This was very slightly loose open. I think it's fine. Standard c-bet, I think, on a dry board, and definitely going to have to bet the turn. I have a little too much equity to check fold with my gutter in addition to my pair, and the ace is a really good card for my range and not so good for his. So if he has just a queen with no flush draw, he's going to fold. I think even queen jack 10 is going to fold that turn. And given that I think his most likely hand's a queen, potentially now ace-queen, I'm certainly not going to bluff. It's just very easy check fold. And he did have 3 pair on the turn, so he had bottom 2 on the flop. Standard play by him. You could actually consider check calling with this hand, but I think it looks a little bit like what it is. Interesting turn. I think I have the best hand usually. I'm not terrified of the straight. However, I'm not going to get 2 streets of value with it. I don't even think I might not get 1 street of value against an 8. So I'm actually going to check and make a tough decision, because if he's tough, he might go ahead and bet just any pair to kind of protect merge. Here I'm going to go ahead and bluff, because now we're almost always chopping the pot. And I have the king of diamonds blocker. Could maybe go a little bit bigger with my betting range there, so he doesn't really have enough, like, a good enough price to call with the chop. That worked out well. Actually, with that sizing, I wasn't expecting him to fold enough, so I didn't like my sizing. Standard hand by him. His preflop call is a little speculative, but certainly fine. And flop call standard, turn call standard, river check standard, and I think both of us played this hand well. Like I said, my open was a little bit loose, and actually his call is a little bit loose. This is a little bit of a tight fold, but I think it's good. So other than both of our preflop plays being a little bit loose, this is, I think, standard on both of our behalves. And I did want to talk about, or I wanted to see what he had. So he did just have 1 pair on the flop, and he didn't end up folding the turn because he hit a 5. Although that's actually a hand he can consider folding, I think. It does not play very well. I'm going to go ahead and check call. I think there's more value in that than betting myself. I'm going to check call the turn. I don't think he has an ace very often, but he might over-rep it. And now I just think I have the best hand, but his best hand is like 3s, and I don't think he's going to call with it, so I'm just going to check. And if he bets, I may consider even folding, thinking he has a 6, but I just think that's what happens very often as it gets checked down. You'll notice I'm opening a lot of buttons in PLO, which I think, especially if people aren't going to be very aggressive with 3-bets, as I get 3-bet, it's pretty profitable. I'm not super comfortable at 50 big blinds or less how to play properly against people playing those stacks. I assume most of them are playing tight, which should mean I should be a little discouraged from doing this, but I get such a good price on it with my blockers that I think probably shows a profit. Here, you could actually fold to the 3-bet. I think this is a little bit too loose of a call. So that was a bad play by me, and I'm going to go ahead and fold the flop, which is very standard. On this board, he's going to have enough king-queen suited type hands that I think he's going to have to fold. If he does have ace-queen, see, I think ace-king gets it in, ace-queen might get it in, so yeah, he has like suited broadways a lot there. So I think a good c-bet spot. Yeah, here he can actually, I think, consider folding this turn very heavily. The queen of diamonds in his hand actually helps because he can bluff diamond rivers pretty confidently, I think. Potentially even, well, could maybe bluff raise with the second nut blocker. Anyways, but still the turn peel's a little bit loose, but very standard by me. Pretty standard by him as well. I open all my pocket pairs under the gun. I believe some people don't. And certainly somebody with a much larger database than me could go through their hands and see if they're not profiting with their lower pairs, and I would not be able to really refute that. But it's my suspicion that you can play those hands. I'm going to go ahead and raise. I think he just folds often enough. And when he doesn't fold, you know, he's going to miss a decent amount of the time. This is not a great board in that it just connects with a lot of hands. I'm actually going to make a very odd play, and I'm going to check back. I'm going to either delay c-bet or consider raising turns. My thinking was he's not going to fold the flop very often, and I don't have enough of a hand that I'm going to be comfortable two-barreling. But I felt that yeah, I felt that I could. I'm still going to follow through, even though I actually think he should have a stronger range for betting this turn. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I wouldn't have enough equity that I'm comfortable barreling off. God, I think he has an ace. I don't think he has two pair, unless he had ace nine. So I guess I go ahead and bluff. My jack blocker is not super relevant, but it's all in. So I think people fold their one pair enough. Slightly loose call here. In a game where I'm going to get 3-bet a lot from the blinds, I would definitely fold this hand. But I'm assuming that their 3-bets, their squeezes percentages aren't crazy high. Interesting flop. I block the ace. I'm going to call. Obviously, I don't beat any value hands, and his flush draws are going to have equity. I don't have a lot of outs to really improve in a big way, but I think I just have the best hand often enough to call in position. And on this turn, I think I'm priced in to call again. You know, even if he has like king, king, jack, 8, I have a little bit of equity with my ace and my open ender and my sevens. And, you know, I have the best hand sometimes as well. It's an interesting river. Sit out for a second and talk about this. So, assuming he bets, the question is, would he bet diamonds here? Because I block the ace. He's opening from early position, so he shouldn't have a lot of 8-5 combos or 8-deuce combos. I don't have much time here, unfortunately. I am going to fold because I just think people don't barrel off in this spot with no blockers, and it's very hard for him to have any kind of blockers on this board. I mean, essentially, for him to have a blocker, it'd have to actually be an 8, which is better than my hand anyways. Or an ace, which is better than my hand, because I have ace with a very bad kicker. Is actually, it looks a little tight, but I think without the ace-high suit, it's a fold. With the ace-high suit, I would play that hand. But yeah, in this spot, really, I don't beat anything except for just, you know, pure 3-barrel bluffs with no equity. If he turned some kind of straight draw, it's just difficult for him to have turned a straight draw because I have the 7-7-6. So I think very standard river fold. I think very standard flop and turn call. On the flop because I have the best hand often enough. On the turn because I occasionally have the best hand, and if not, I very often have equity. So yeah, I think pretty standard all around. I'm actually going to wrap up this video, and I'm going to stop the recording and make another. Just, I'll keep on going. So, as always, any questions, comments, feedback, the usual, more than happy to answer. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to hear what you think about the format of one of each. Obviously, I'm making another video right now, so you don't have a choice. You're going to have to watch another one. Or I guess you don't have to watch it, but you're probably paying for it. But yeah, and as always, let me know what you guys want. It is, as I said, it's difficult to please everybody, because I only have so many videos that I can do. But I'm doing my best to first of all make my videos count in terms of content, and which I always do, which I always attempt to do at least, and balancing between no limit and PLO. Thanks for watching. This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. Take care, guys.